Welcome to The Beat. I'm Ari Melber. Happy Monday. We start the week on a busy note. The market's already plunging again over what is widely described as Donald Trump's created uncertainty. We have more on that tonight. It matters. Also, new calls to end the Fox News experiment at the Pentagon as the Defense Secretary Hegseth there faces new scandal on new reporting on a wholly separate security leak around his misuse or careless use of Signal group chats, with calls to resign coming now from within the Republican Party. But we begin right now with one of our special reports on this. The developments coming out today on the legal clash that is testing Trump's demands for more executive power. And it is really captured and symbolized by these images, which I'm going to leave up for a moment as we start the week. It's an effort that the president is waging by testing how far he can get, ducking and defying Supreme Court orders, including ruling against what you see in the middle of your screen. Because the United States under Trump erroneously sent that detainee, Kilmar Abrego Garcia, to the wrong foreign prison. And a Democratic senator who you see there just met with him after having to face down two governments, a foreign one and our own, in the version of the Trump executive branch, who were working together to hide that individual, which has now sparked an extraordinary clash inside the United States court system. And so I'm going to give you right now all of the information on this, some of it quite concerning, some of it suggesting Trump has already gone too far, and that's according to people who generally share some of his legal philosophies. So let's start here. Today, I can tell you Mr. Garcia remains stuck erroneously in El Salvador. I could tell you this deportation clash is now rocking all three branches of the United States government. And that senator who visited him and relayed that Garcia was moved to a different detention center is on the march. Senator Van Hollen says, after doing the work, pushing this as far as it could go, leaving the United States to go to that country and return, Van Hollen says the line has clearly been crossed. He says the Trump administration is flouting the Supreme Court order, meaning defying it, and illegally pressing on. He argues that Trump officials have admitted they are doing, quote, nothing to facilitate the return as ordered.
They're very much flouting the courts as we speak. As the courts have said, facilitating his return means something more than doing nothing. And they are doing nothing. Yes, they're absolutely in violation of the court orders as we speak.
Violation of the court orders. Now, let's just take this piece by piece. It is important. What you just heard there is clearly Senator Van Hollen's view. You might agree with it, might sound logical, but that's the senator's view of this clash. I can also report that on this case, the Garcia part, we do not yet know if the Supreme Court agrees. If, in other words, the Supreme Court thinks that the Trump administration has, at a provable level, at the court level of evidence, been obviously dishonest and defied their order. Trump aides say, though, they will not return Garcia. They claim they don't have to. And so we don't know whether they will view that the way Van Hollen and many others do as defiance, or whether the Supreme Court could view those claims from those Trump officials as the kind of possible outcome that was implied in the original ruling, that the ruling was worded broadly, facilitate, and that it gave the administration room. Indeed, we covered that possibility the very night the first order came down, in those first minutes. So all eyes are now on Chief Justice Roberts for what is the large, probably unavoidable test of whether centuries of independent Supreme Court authority will wither and die on his watch. If Roberts cannot find the legal backbone or strategy to stand up with the majority over the long haul here to protect the court's independent authority, then we could see that. He has to face the reality of dealing with this particular politician in the actual way this is going to continue to go down in this Trump era. Roberts cannot maintain the court's authority merely through the purple prose of high-minded written opinions if they are not carried out to actually stand up to the would-be autocratic claims here. Now, for his part, and I mentioned this in our coverage last week, if you happen to catch it, President Trump has started to verbally backtrack. he has started to claim he's not involved in the deportation details, which might be a sign that he needs to maintain some room for what he could see as the kind of loss that officials will not be able to defy. And a MAGA Republican ally, Senator Kennedy, is now claiming all of this by Trump was a mistake in the administration. The White House doesn't want to pay for admitting that, he argues. That might sound logical. I'm going to actually play the quote from Senator Kennedy on Meet the Press in a second. But before I do, I always like to give you the facts so you can make sense of these things. Recall that the administration already admitted it was a mistake, an error. An administrative error was the term they used. They said so in court. So that already happened, which means they're paying whatever cost there is for that. And the reason it looks like the administration wants to go further, to invite this clash or test or defiance with the courts, is precisely why it would appear that so many Trump officials admit the error and still won't return the detainee to fix the error.
It was a screw up, and I understand why the administration is bowed up and said we won't admit it's a mistake, because if they do, they'll have their throats torn out. But it was a screw up. I don't see any pattern here.
Senator Kennedy says he does not see a pattern. Okay. But he also says he doesn't see them admitting the mistake, which, fact check please, which they did, which you know if you've been following the news or listening to this report, as I showed you that before. It helps to sometimes sandwich what we get from the politicians with the facts that we have. They did admit the error, but they're trying to continue to seize wartime powers on the same basis to deport others without due process or rights. So going into this weekend, the administration was trying to deport other people in a similar manner, but this time to Venezuela on that same theory that they used for El Salvador. If you're keeping track, under the Trump administration's claims, things they actually say out loud in court, they claim emergency wartime powers for wars with El Salvador and Venezuela right now. Let's keep it simple. We've got those countries' flags up. Now, are we at war with those countries? Feels like you'd know about that if we were. To be extra clear and not just sort of argumentative, I will report for you, in reality, the United States is not at war with either country. And legally, Congress has not declared war with either country or any affiliated non-state organizations related to those territories, if you want to be really technical. No declaration of war. I mention that because it is one of the legal requirements to invoke these grave wartime powers that the Trump administration was trying to use, including going into this weekend. I told you I'd stay on the evidence, keep it simple. So let's keep going straightforward. Those are, by any measure, foreign policy, legal, historical, those are extreme, obvious power grabs beyond the law. And that's coupled with the original alleged flouting or dodging, if you want to be as charitable as possible, of the Supreme Court ruling to facilitate one person's return. So, here we are. Is this Supreme Court just completely surrendering already? Well, depending on how closely you follow the news during the weekend, you may already have a clue. If you're catching up now, which is perfectly fine, Monday's a good day to catch up, right? Can't do it 24/7. Even the news people don't do it 24/7. They have to sleep. If you're catching up now Monday evening to start the week, here is the legal answer. No, this court is not completely surrendering in advance on this now main skirmish. This deportation and immigration wartime powers thing might be the big first test in these 100 days. The court has clearly been vexed at how to handle Trump's extreme actions in these 90 days or so, give or take. But in a last-minute weekend action, which shows that the justices had to interrupt their own lives to step up to this challenge, and by the way, everyone in government knows all about Friday night news dumps and ploys, right? It's a news thing, but it relates back to what the government's doing. It happens more in government than some other fields. I'm sure you've heard of it, Friday night news dump, right? Pushing on something controversial that you want to get through and hopefully get less attention and news, and less news and attention means maybe you'll get away with it. But in this past weekend's action, the Supreme Court used its power to stop the Trump administration from any such new deportations under the same war claims I just mentioned. The court stepped in at the 11th hour And as I mentioned, if you follow all your alerts over the weekend, you might have heard this, but I want to put it in the full context for you right now. The High Court blocking any more Trump deportations under that power and telling federal officials not to remove any detainees from the U.S. A rare, overnight, short ruling. Some interpreting this as the High Court now finding that its patience is running thin, losing patience with these type of Trump ploys and actions, which would, on their face, and now according to the Supreme Court, defy quite obvious laws and limits that are established. Not some new tough question, but past court precedents. So this weekend ruling sets a pause on Trump trying to invoke, or many say abuse, the Wartime Alien Enemies Act. It also could suggest skepticism among some of the justices for the whole case, not on the emergency basis of can you move these folks on and off the buses and the planes this weekend, but can you do it ever? Can you say you're at war with those countries and do it? Because these have been emergency sort of quick rulings on steps. This is not what they call the final merits ruling, the thing where you have the whole briefing and the oral argument, and then you have the people running out with the decision, and we're not there yet. As for the president's publicly stated view that he sees this court, the Roberts Court, as basically partisan, MAGA, and transactional, that he wants the judges he appointed to back him, well, the legal news here shows some appointees disagree with that. Some of his appointees. All three of the justices that Trump appointed to the Supreme Court went against him, against these deportation powers on an emergency basis this weekend. So justices are using their authority to stop some of these Trump moves. Indeed, the only dissenting views that were on Trump's side, you see there, only two. So he was nowhere near winning this thing. And they're from Republican appointees who are noted for some extreme legal views that predate Trump. Those losing side dissents come from Justice Thomas and Alito. Alito making the fairly non-legal argument that he thinks issuing the order at midnight was not necessary or appropriate. Now, there's not much of a precedent about saying what time of day the court can rule. There's not a lot of clock case law. But when government action is imminent, as it was here, the courts are always faced with a fairly rushed decision to act or not. As I mentioned, that could be a weekend decision off the Friday night news dump thing. It could be for other reasons. It could be emergency appeals or deadlines. Last minute actions are either going to get ruled on, which give them some color of law, or they won't be, which then can reward a government, in this case, Donald Trump, for trying to act in manners that involve speed or secrecy to evade oversight. It was a short and quick ruling, but Alito's emphasis on the clock almost suggests buying into that type of legal tactic by this Trump DOJ. Now remember, the whole clash here grew out of the Friday news and emergency hearing I mentioned, the planned deportations, which started with government buses that were seen here in Texas. The news was covering this Friday, including right here on the beat. The judge took the ACLU appeal on behalf of those Venezuelans that were believed to be held in Texas, affected by those bus routes, over what was an apparently attempted imminent removal with no time or proper due process. During the hearing, the buses began taking about 28 detainees to the airport. NBC was reporting on that. We have the footage that shows them departing that Texas detention center, passing the airport's exit, and then abruptly turning around. If you could boil down the rule of law to the actual physical observation of the treatment of these individuals, well, you would have that footage right there. So what the president tried on late Friday was stopped over the weekend. Stopped in the most finite, frankly, imminent and dramatic way that the courts intervene. And if you follow the news, you probably remember that courts start at the district level and there's appeals. The Supreme Court does not and is not built to weigh in every Friday night or weekend on every emergency measure. And yet that is part of what it has to do if it is going to keep up with these efforts to, according to an overwhelming majority of the court, evade the plain letter of the law, the limits on wartime powers, and what the court has already said against Trump. So we are witnessing, as I told you moments ago, a shift from where we were Friday to where we are on Monday night on a larger majority of the Supreme Court saying no to Trump, at least on the efforts to duck and evade. And there are many other signs beyond the formal government activity that these actions are opposed across the country. Trump's approval rating has dropped already below his share of the vote that he won in November. 44% means even his own supporters, some of them have a kind of buyer's remorse or just don't approve of this stuff. The trade war has been plunging the stock market. It had more losses today as Trump feuds with the Fed chair. You can compare it to other presidencies. It's not very good. Trump also faces his lowest approval on the economy ever. And those are just the broad snapshots. Then there's how this is playing out. Supreme Court is, of course, the law of the land at the top. There are other elite institutions that have had to face what Trump is doing and make their call. Harvard pushed back, and today they're pushing back further. Having risked their funding to take a stand against government Trump meddling, they're now suing the Trump administration, putting him on the back foot in a court landscape with the Supreme Court skeptical, at least, of some of the overreach. And while few presidents see mass protests in their first 100 days, few presidents have run their first, say, 90 days like Trump, which is why we see these reports, according to organizers, of when you count the national protests, it topping millions. Towns and cities across the country. That includes some large cities, but also smaller areas in red states, ranging from Harrisburg to Little Rock. With the economic problems and the Trump-Musk cuts driving some of this, because that hits people's pocketbooks, calls to deal with this with more of a direct approach, calls against kings in America. This weekend shows the point of concern over Trump flouting the courts or disappearing people like I've just been telling you about. Let's take some of this actually in full because we can see this is what it looks like. This is happening out there. Some people are too busy. Some people are trying to earn a living, but other people are coming out and making their voices heard. We might be seeing the beginning of an even wider resistance coalition. We're seeing calls to impeach and remove. That's in San Francisco. In South Carolina, we saw a protester tapping Sunday's Easter theme. A little more light-hearted way to say hop away from fascism. The Simpsons character Ralph starring in a sign noting his catchphrase, "I'm in danger." You can see that there in the middle. While signs warn democracy dies in silence in Michigan.
Hands off our democracy, hands off women's health care, hands off, to be honest, there's too many things to list.
Everyone should have due process.
We are here because we are fighting against the oligarchs and the billionaire class.
Our leaders need to stand up to Trump and get Elon Musk out of our government.
You shouldn't just be able to decide what the laws are to disappear people.
We're going to wind up in a major depression.
Due process has been abandoned for everybody. It can be abandoned for you.
Fact check, true. Due process, human rights, whether you have rights before the government you face, which could involve how you're treated, whether you can speak, whether you can connect with the lawyer that you're afforded a right to have, or whether you're disappeared abroad. If it could happen to one, it can happen to many. If it can happen to many, it can happen to any. These are old bedrock themes. I've mentioned to you in our coverage that the United States has not always perfectly upheld them. Indeed, there are many lessons in how the governments of the past have tried to deny this to some, and how some of America's best moments are when we came together, regardless of creed, color, or belief system, and actually stood for the principle that they are deserved and required for all. So yes, the man who continues to rot away in a foreign prison or detention center that the U.S. government under Trump admits he is not supposed to be in, he is not just one person who you can care about, although many of his advocates say they care about him and you should. But at the broader level, what the Supreme Court is now actually getting into on an emergency weekend basis and what the protesters are talking about is this test. History is usually messy, not neat. And when you're in it, it's hard to know when the exact inflection points are coming. My job is to report to you what's happening with the evidence we have and some context. And what I'm reporting to you is what's happening is a heck of a lot of people, from a majority of the Supreme Court, including Trump appointees, to the protesters all across the land, are coming together to say the line has been crossed and we as a country must step up. We have a very special guest with a lot of experience in exactly those scenarios, Counselor Maya Wiley, when we're back in 90 seconds. We're joined by Maya Wiley, a former civil prosecutor and leader of the Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights. We walked through what's happening, your view of this.
Well, my view of it is very similar to yours, Ari. Look, we are seeing an administration that is intentionally creating chaos for people by saying, we're going to take what we believe to be or assert as our power of the pen to define whole groups of people we think can be removed. In this case, when it comes to Venezuelan migrants, we're going to say, we'll just unilaterally say if you are in a group we will determine as a terrorist group, even though we have laws, even though we have courts, even though we have prosecutors who can address any crimes by those individuals. But by the way, we won't even suggest that we have evidence that they are members of those groups. And remember, what you're describing that happened at the Supreme Court over the weekend was unprecedented in the sense that it was so quick, and that there were two Supreme Court justices that wanted to say, we don't agree with you. And they issued that order before those justices got to write their point of view. And in those point of view, frankly, just saying, we just don't think you had the opportunity to make this decision unless it was extraordinary. And the reason that that's important is because one of the reasons we saw this out of the Supreme Court is because it was extraordinary circumstances. What they had seen was that we had an administration that said to a district court judge, order, return people, bring those planes back, give them due process. Too late. And in the case of Kilmar saying, oh, go bring him back, do what you can. Supreme Court said facilitate it. And then Donald Trump, with a noted, publicly named authoritarian leader in Bukele, President Bukele, whose prison is a notorious human rights violating prison, essentially says, yeah, I don't have to do it. And Trump jokes about the homegrowns. I don't know where you were born, Ari, but I was born in Syracuse, New York. That makes me a homegrown. And so the signal that this administration has sent and that people are responding to across the political spectrum is, wait. If we let you do this, we're essentially saying anybody, any president can do this. Even Joe Rogan, who said in 2028, if there's a president we don't like, maybe that president could come for us too.
Well, I don't have it on my bingo card, Maya Wiley checking Joe Rogan every day, but he's a big MAGA supporter, and it speaks to the point we raised in the report, which is the protests are widening. It's early days. The Supreme Court is not close now. It was 7-2 on this issue. And since you called for it, Maya, we will listen to a little bit of Joe Rogan, the MAGA supporter in general, disagreeing on this, the due process violations. Take a look.
The problem with things that are going in a radical direction, and then there's an overcorrection. So the overcorrection is lack of due process. The overcorrection is like round them all up, ship them to jail. Like that's like some things that you say when you're not thinking things through.
Still a charitable gloss on the mistake, but the point is he's got an audience that's sometimes runs tens of millions in America. And what they're hearing is markets are down, the trade war's not working, human rights, Americans' rights are in danger, and it's still early days. When you see the court acting like it did and the protests out in the country, which show where a lot of the concern is, do you think that John Roberts is or can build not only a majority, but a durable majority above 5? What he had on the weekend was 7, to at least hold the line on these fundamentals.
Well, our expectation is he must try as the Chief Justice. And I'll just say this about Joe Rogan's last statement about it seeming like they didn't think it through. Read Project 2025. They thought it through. Look at Stephen Miller, who's the architect of this, who's even quoted in emails citing white supremacist tracts about the country becoming not white enough. I don't think there's a question about the ideology underpinning this or the intention. We saw it in executive orders. We're even about to see it come for not-for-profit organizations and coming for
Yep.
lawyers just for representing people and demanding they get their day in court. We just submitted a unity plaque packed out in the public as a civil rights coalition saying, we're going to make sure we are united and not allowing division because it just hurts real people. And this is why we have to refuse to be silent. But all of this are fear-inducing tactics, and it's time for the Supreme Court to recognize it has to be the guardrail.
Yeah. Maya Wiley, thank you on our special report starting the hour. Appreciate it. I mentioned the markets plunging under Trump uncertainty. We have more on that coming up. And the scandal hitting the Pentagon, where Trump has been running a real-world Fox News experiment. And they're finding chaos. That's according to Pentagon aides. We'll be back. There are new calls for the defense secretary appointed by Donald Trump from Fox News, Pete Hegseth, to resign, as there are new reports of another scandal around security information and a Signal group chat.
Pete Hegseth is at the center of another group chat controversy.
Reportedly used his personal phone again to disclose information about U.S. military operations in Yemen.
This one reportedly included his wife, as well as his brother, and his personal lawyer, who both work for the Pentagon.
Growing questions about Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth and his judgment.
Increasingly, people in the White House who are saying, why does this keep happening?
The Pentagon chief there using his personal phone to send info about military operations to Yemen. The Signal group chat totaled 13 people, including family members, with no business apparently consulting on any such war plans. The Times reports the chat had flight schedules for the F-A-18 Hornets targeting the Houthis in Yemen. It's not clear why either would need to know about upcoming military strikes. And Hegseth sending the information after Nate had warned him to be careful not to share sensitive information on unsecure communications systems. Now, last month was the first time this bombshell hit, and the first time we learned, because it was such an incompetent or chaotic operation, that he sent the group chat information by adding a journalist. A former DOJ official says there are likely more shoes to drop in short order, bigger bombshell stories coming this week. Key Pentagon reporters have been telling sources privately. All of this calling into question not just the security protocols at one level, but whether this is the right person to be running the Pentagon at this tense time in America, and whether Donald Trump's Fox News experiment is working. We're joined by Pulitzer Prize winner from the Washington Post, Eugene Robinson. Welcome, Gene.
Oh, Ari, it's great to be here.
Great to have you. It is a story that would be more comical if it were a movie or if it were over. But the serious part is a heck of a lot of people risk their lives for the United States. And while there is some known risk that comes externally, here the reporting is that the risk is coming from the top of the Pentagon itself. And doesn't the buck stop with the president who chose this person and now knows how it's going?
Right. It's like in the horror movie, the call is coming from inside the house, right? This is from the guy in the big office in the Pentagon. And the problem starts with step one. Pete Hegseth should never have been appointed Secretary of Defense. He should never have been named. He should never have been confirmed. That was obvious from the very beginning, as he had none of the qualifications that a Secretary of Defense needs to have. So we've had these two incidents of highly sensitive information. They keep saying it's not technically classified, but highly sensitive information being discussed on Signal chats with just about anybody, including Jeff Goldberg, the editor of The Atlantic. But even if you put those aside, the Pentagon is one of the biggest and most notoriously obdurate bureaucracies in the world. And it takes somebody who knows his or her way around that bureaucracy just to run the Pentagon, especially to run the Pentagon at a time when there's so many issues that face our military, genuine issues, not the fake issues that Hegseth likes to talk about. So this was wrong from the very start.
Yeah, and he's gotten busted in various ways, including the whole security protocol over there where they literally just add a journalist. But most people who get a speeding ticket for going 100 know that that's not the first and only time they've ever gone 100. That's when they got caught. And so what does this also say about the risk factor that he is talking to other people, including other people in ways that are dangerous? Congress has an oversight duty on that. We've had a long, years-running debate about all sorts of email and security protocols. The Journal reports that Hegseth brought his wife to sensitive meetings with foreign military officials. She's a former Fox producer, 2 meetings with foreign military counterparts where sensitive information was discussed. That would seem to be something that the intelligence agencies in the Pentagon would be enforcing. In other words, he's supposed to be one of the people in the core intel circle protecting the intelligence. And instead, he's releasing it out for whatever motivation we don't know. But family members who don't have security clearances aren't supposed to get that.
No, they're not. And this is a recklessness that in any other circumstance would be considered criminal. I mean, people get prosecuted for this sort of security lapse of Pete Hegseth. No one expects him to be prosecuted for this because of this administration. But the way that first chat, the one that Jeff Goldberg was on, was interesting just because there were so many other high-ranking, cabinet level officials, including Marco Rubio and the National Security Advisor and others, on that chat. And it makes one wonder whether these officials were in the habit of using Signal, not an approved method of this sort of communication, using Signal to evade archival requirements, to evade the law about how the government's business should be recorded and preserved for history. And so I wonder about that. We've never gotten a straight answer about that. They kind of say we won't do it again, but they did it again. So who can say that it has stopped? Who could say that it's gotten any better?
Yeah, I think that's another big question, as you say, which goes to whether we have accountable government or at these high levels in the Pentagon efforts, as we were covering in a different context under the law earlier, to evade what are supposed to be non-negotiable rules, again, for everyone's public safety and national security. Gene Robinson, thank you. Appreciate it. Coming up in our news hour here, we will also report on the honor and the grieving for the renowned global figure, Pope Francis. We have that coming up. As well as next, the clash between Trump and his Fed chair over how the tariff war is failing the markets down again today. Turning to some facts and economic news that the Trump administration would rather faded, but it's not fading. The market's volatile, slumping again, reeling from President Trump's tariff war, which has been widely viewed as a huge avoidable problem, and Trump's choice to then attack the independent Fed chair for basically citing the known economic risks that tariff policies pose, like upping prices and inflation. Trump's attacks also stoking uncertainty on Wall Street because while the tariff war is bad enough and has cost many trillions, there is concern that he will add to those risks by picking this fight over trying to oust the Fed chair. That's something that has been legally untested, but is probably illegal under current precedent. And with that in mind, here is how another week has begun in Trump's economy.
Monday morning and the markets are down. Dow futures off by about 373 points.
Markets, though, selling off on these trade worries. You have the NASDAQ now down more than 3%.
The threats to Fed independence are real and growing.
Uncertainty. Investors don't like it. There is no trade deal to talk of. And this is what you get.
The dollar has fallen sharply since President Trump's April 2nd tariff rollout and has seen extra pressure here as Trump continues the criticism of the Fed chair.
As for the Fed chair, well, Powell's job is to assess evidence and run policy regardless of what politicians say. He has done that, facing this tariff turmoil, while also rebutting any Trump calls that he should quit.
Tariffs are highly likely to generate at least a temporary rise in inflation.
We're never going to be influenced by any political pressure.
Some of the president-elect's advisors have suggested that you should resign. If he asked you to leave, would you go?
No. As that great Chicagoan, Ferris Bueller, once noted, life moves pretty fast.
The Hawley-Smoot Tariff Act, which, anyone? Did it work? Anyone? It did not work.
We will do what we do strictly without consideration of political or any other extraneous factors.
So Powell is staying in his post, and that post is independent of White House control under law. The precedent is he cannot be fired over these tariff policy disagreements, only to find misconduct. Trump and his aides want to test if they can oust him. And on Wall Street, many see the clash as really drawing attention to Trump's desire to shoot a messenger instead of fixing a problem. In this case, a problem Trump created. Fox News' sister outlet, the Wall Street Journal, has wrote that problem is that Trump's tariffs are now the biggest threat to the world economy. The biggest threat? Trump's tariffs. Can't put it any more simple than that. And here is that economy. The Dow Jones down another 970 points today, or over 2%. The drop since the inauguration, when you take all the markets together, has topped $5 trillion lost for Trump's chosen tariffs. He can continue to stoke the uncertainty and attack the Fed chair if he wants. Wall Street's verdict is that will only add more pain, first to the markets, then to real people, and eventually, of course, to politics, where it is always the economy stupid. We'll be right back. Turning to major global news here, followers around the world mourning the death of Pope Francis, who passed away early this morning. Pope dying hours after greeting Catholics who were observing Easter Sunday at the Vatican. We can show you how this major development broke here at home.
We are coming on the air with breaking news this morning. NBC News has just confirmed that Pope Francis has died, head of the Catholic Church, leader to more than 1 billion believers.
Somber news from the Vatican, especially following Easter Sunday.
He had made this appearance during Easter Sunday, but now this news just coming in that Pope Francis has passed away at age 88.
Clearly a somber connection and overlap with the holiday of Easter. The president has ordered flags at half-staff today. He and the First Lady will attend this funeral, which is a major global gathering that the Vatican has begun planning. President Obama saying Pope Francis was a rare leader who made us want to be better people. The Pope held customary meetings with many heads of state and all three presidents that served during his tenure as Pope, Presidents Obama, Trump, and Biden. In the Obama era, this Pope actually became the first to ever address the United States Congress.
You are called to defend and preserve the dignity of your fellow citizens in the tireless and demanding pursuit of the common good. For this is the chief aim of all politics. Building a future of freedom requires love of the common good.
Mourners were seen gathering in St. Peter's Square today to honor Pope Francis. His legacy will not be lost, said Italy's prime minister in a tribute. Other heads of state citing his spirit of hope and work for the poor, for peace and equality. For the Catholic Church, Pope Francis presented a bridge from the religious calling to more practical outreach across the world, and that included in the developing world. This was a pope who rose from modest means in Argentina and was the first Jesuit and Latin American pontiff, as the New York Times notes. There were sometimes bitter clashes with the traditionalists who opposed his push for a, quote, more inclusive Roman Catholic Church. He tried to move the church away from certain divisive issues like abortion, shift its emphasis to global problems like climate change, poverty, and migration, issues that the Pope viewed as important for all people on earth, but which others viewed as a type of political shift for the Vatican. Indeed, more so than past leaders, the Pope was hospitable to the LGBTQ plus community and efforts to elevate women and others who had been traditionally excluded from aspects of that leadership. Pope Francis was 88 years old. There is so much wrong with the internet sometimes in politics, so we want to remind you there are a lot of funny people out there as well. We've been talking about this trade war. Well, here is a meme, a fun image made that's by someone on the internet who wanted to make a point, made Make America Great Again hat made in China with the prices consecutively going up thanks to Donald Trump making price wars happen all the way up to $100. That is a meme, not a real news piece of information. Here's another meme from a wrestling fan, pro-science, pro-choice, pro-wrestling. Why not? We love it. Or there's Jim from The Office. I have a joke about trickle-down economics, but 99% of you won't get it. Get it? And when it comes to Trump's economic problems, we have the Handmaid's Tale ladies in a meme saying this is how we live now. I voted for Trump because eggs were cheaper before. If you have a favorite meme, again, it's all in good political fun. You can tell us on social media at Ari Melber, that's at ARIMELBER, on basically any of the platforms you might choose. Tell us your favorite meme or send us one and we'll share some of them online because we like to have a laugh every so often. Thanks for watching.